Today we're going to look at chapter 15 and talk about really how does Europe surge ahead of the rest of the world. And a lot of it had to do with changes in science and religion. So let's get started. So Western Christianity becomes fragmented. This is really the beginning of the Protestant Reformation. It begins with a German monk by the name of Martin Luther. And Martin Luther was upset about several things in the Catholic Church, and he was really trying to inspire reform. Specifically, he did not like the sale of indulgences. An indulgence is a pardon given in return for repentance. So what happened was there was an earthquake in Rome, and it destroyed the center of Christianity, St. Peter's Church. And the Pope gave he gave all the monks the order to raise money to rebuild St. Peter's Cathedral. And a German monk by the name of Tetzel decided he would sell indulgences. Now, an indulgence is a pardon given in return for repentance. And the idea was, the way to get to heaven is to do good because everybody sins. So what Luther didn't like was when Tetzel began selling these indulgences, it looked like a rich man could buy his way into heaven, whereas a poor man was going to spend much longer in purgatory, which is kind of like a way station on your way to heaven. So what the church did is, once Luther nailed his 95 Thesis on the church door of Wittenberg, Germany, it ordered Luther to cease and desist. And instead of kind of stopping there, Luther kind of doubled down. And he said, basically, his tenets of the Protestant faith, which is only faith can gain you salvation. It has nothing to do with works. It's only your faith. Secondly, he didn't believe in hierarchy. So, for instance, in the Catholic Church, much like ancient Rome, you have the Pope and then the bishops on down to the priests. Well, Luther believed anybody of faith were equal. And then he said that the Bible is the sole source. Now, the Protestant Reformation probably wouldn't have taken off if it wasn't for the invention of the printing press. And that helped spread Luther's ideas. And it really led to many of the German princes who were seeking independence from the Holy Roman Emperor to take up his cause. That's where the word Protestant came in, because they were protesting the Holy Roman Emperor's treatment of Luther. So eventually a very massive war called the 30 Years' War developed. It killed maybe a third of the population of Central Europe. You had big major powers from France and even Sweden jumping in. And it was finally settled by the Peace of Augsburg, which said that every German prince has a right to decide for himself and his subjects what religion to follow in his state. So that meant if you wanted to become Lutheran, you could become Lutheran. And if you wanted to stay Catholic, you could stay Catholic. Much of northern Germany would become Lutheran, while much of southern Germany would remain Catholic. So what this did is it created a vast schism or schism in the Christian church, Western Christian church. I mean, the first one was the Eastern break off of the Eastern Orthodox Church in 1054. But now in the 1500s, you see various forms of Protestantism. It begins with Luther, it would go to Anglican, Baptist, Calvinist, and so on. And many women would support Protestantism, including Luther's wife. Luther was a monk, his wife was a nun, they would marry, and many people said she was really the brains behind Lutheranism. But anyway, women and men both supported the Protestant religion. These are just some pictures of Luther nailing his 95 Thesis, as they're called, on the door of Wittenberg, Germany. One other thing that should be of note is that Luther would translate the Bible into German. Previously, it was almost exclusively in Latin. And so now this would encourage more people to read it. One of the roles of the Pope in the Catholic Church is to defend orthodoxy, or basically to interpret the Bible. This is what it means. Whereas with Protestantism, you'd see many different schisms, by saying, okay, this is what it means, or no, it means this. So the good news for Protestants is everybody could read the Bible for themselves, and it would help promote mass literacy. The bad news is Christianity would be kind of all over the place when it came to the various interpretations of the Bible. So the printing press, as I mentioned, Johann Gutenberg would take a Chinese Baisheng, his invention, movable print or movable type, and start mass producing Gutenberg's Bible and other books, and that would help spread literacy. Religious differences would further fracture the political system. Whether, I could get deeper into this. You've got John Calvin, who was actually French, but he'd be driven from France into Switzerland. And Calvin believed in predestination, which was basically if you lived in a community of believers, then you would be, God already knew who was going to heaven. The Calvinists would spread to what today is the Netherlands and Scotland, and then from there to the United States. We call them Presbyterians. And then you got Henry VIII, who was upset with the Pope because he wouldn't let him divorce his wives. So he would form his own religion, which he would call the Church of England, or Anglican, which is similar in structure, except that the King of England gets to appoint all the religious leaders, the bishops. We call them Episcopalians here in America. So the Catholics weren't kind of ignoring the fact that they were losing so many adherents in Northern Europe. So they began what they called the Counter-Reformation, which was a major effort at Catholic revival. Out of this comes two real things. First is a new Catholic religious order known as the Jesuits. They were named after Ignatius of Loyola. And Ignatius, who once was a warrior, became a monk and wanted to start the Society of Jesus. These are black-robed individuals who believe mainly in two things. One is education. In fact, many universities are Jesuit, even in the United States today. And the other is missionary work. The Jesuits would be instrumental in spreading Catholicism outside of Europe. So, for instance, here in St. Mary's, many of the first priests that came to St. Mary's were Jesuits, and they converted many of the natives that lived here. So Jesuits spread Christianity, and that's one of the prime missions, as we already mentioned, of Spain and Portugal. And they also established universities. The other thing that came out of it was the Council of Trent. And what the council was a meeting that lasted 16 years. And they were going to define church doctrines more clearly. So in the city of Trent in northern Italy, the cardinals and the Pope and everybody met. And they came up with a few things. For instance, they wanted to eliminate certain superstitions. They decided that the Catholic Church, that the people like ceremonies. So, for instance, Protestants aren't into icons or ceremonies as much as Catholics. So they kept that. And as for indulgences, they said that, indulgences are good because they encourage people to do good and earn their way into heaven. But they should never be sold. So kind of a compromise between Luther's position. So anyway, that's what the Council of Trent and the Counter-Reformation was about. So out of all these divisions in Christianity came a great amount of skepticism. Skepticism is kind of like doubt. Do we believe everything the church tells us, or do we start figuring things out on our own? So a good example of this is the argument that took place between the English skeptic Peter Abelard, who said everything should be doubted, and that you shouldn't just blindly trust religion, and the Catholic Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, who said, doubting is dangerous and you should have faith. Into this walked St. Thomas Aquinas, who basically said that you need to have faith, but you should also figure out man's ability to reason. That can bring you closer to God. And so I think that's really important when you look at the scientific revolution. When you say, for instance, contrast it with Islam, who early on Islam was the center of learning, especially in Baghdad. But later on, they came to look at science as kind of dangerous to religion, whereas Christianity's kind of moving in the opposite direction. Where early on Christianity, especially with Galileo, looked at science as kind of dangerous, but now is beginning to embrace it. Christianity outward bound was motivated and benefited from European expansion, not only the Jesuits, but the science that would enable the voyages of the Dutch and the English and the French would help spread their religion. And imperialism really makes the globalization of Christianity possible. It was a main motivator for the Spanish and the Dutch, and later on, after British and French and other colonies were established, you would see more of it spreading to, say, Asia and Africa. So just kind of looking at new areas of Christianity, first notice the old areas in Africa, the Coptic Christians of Egypt and the Ethiopian Orthodox Christian. You also had St. Thomas Christians in India, and a little bit in the Ming with the Nestorians. You got the Eastern Orthodox Christians spreading from Russia, but the big news here is the various Christians in the Americas and Africa and Asia, like the Philippines Catholics. So Native Americans were receptive to the conquering religion. I think I've already mentioned the Aztecs and the people of Mexico and the Virgin of Guadalupe. Basically what you're getting here is syncretism. The idea that we can keep some of our old practices. Syncretism, no matter where it is, Europe in the old days, or Asia, or Africa, or the Americas, it allows people to convert more willingly by keeping their practices. A good example of syncretism would be how in Bolivia and Peru today, where they carry the statues through the streets on holy days of the saints or Mary, much like they carried the mummified remains of the Incas. So this is syncretism. So the Europeans claimed exclusive religious truths in Christianity. The thing about Christianity is that it doesn't see that value in other religions. So it's pretty exclusive. And as I mentioned, blending of two religious traditions was common. You see that throughout the spread of not only Christianity but Islam as well. Here's a good picture that's showing syncretism. If you look at the Last Supper, you see that they're drinking chicha, which is kind of Peruvian corn beer. They're eating guinea pig or chinchilla. So you look at them and you see a lot of the syncretism. Similarly, the cross being raised in the Andean mountains. Christianity reached China in the Ming and Qing dynasties, really with the Nestorians, but later with the traders. No mass conversion in China, mainly because of their indigenous established religions, and many of the Confucians kind of didn't like this barbaric religion. And missionaries offered little for the Chinese. You can see, like for instance, some Jesuit scholars like Adam Shaw and Matteo Ricci did convert Chinese calendars and were allowed there to spread a little of their scientific learning. But really, for the mass amounts of people in China, Christianity didn't have a lot of appeal. And besides, they really did not like the foreigners. So we're going to end that there with the spread of Christianity. I think syncretism is an important term to know when you're talking about the spread of religions. And good examples of syncretism are important to know.